The sea wind brushed against my face as I stood on the balcony of my new coastal home, watching the golden waves fold into one another. The sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the world in soft amber. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without guilt. After my husband's passing 7 years ago, and decades of being everyone's caretaker, I had finally done something for myself. The house was everything I had ever dreamed of: large open windows, white curtains that danced in the ocean breeze, and a small garden blooming with jasmine that I planted myself. It wasn't just a house. It was a promise I made to myself, a promise that I would no longer live in the shadows of obligation. My name is Margaret. I am 72 years old, and I spent most of my life being the silent backbone of a family that never truly saw me. My son, Ethan, and his wife, Caroline, had their own world, one that never included me except when they needed something. After my husband's death, they called twice a year, once for my birthday, and once when they needed help with a loan or childcare. But I had stopped expecting anything from them. My only true companion was silence. Silence that didn't demand, didn't manipulate, didn't judge. When I bought this beach house, I told no one. I sold my old apartment quietly, packed my books, my husband's framed photograph, and a few sentimental things that reminded me of gentler days. It was a new beginning, one I didn't know to anyone. Every morning I would wake up early, make tea, and sit by the ocean reading novels I never had time to finish in my younger years. I'd hum old songs to myself, talk to the seagulls that gathered on the fence, and sometimes even dance a little in the living room when I thought no one could see me. I was finally free. Then one afternoon, the past returned, wearing expensive shoes and a false smile. I was watering my plants when I heard the sound of tires crunching gravel. A black SUV stopped in front of my gate. The doors opened, and there they were, Ethan and Caroline, the two faces that had been absent from my life for nearly 9 years. They looked older, thinner, worn down by life, but the shine in Caroline's eyes was not affection, it was calculation. "Mom!" Ethan's voice was too cheerful, too rehearsed. "It's so good to see you." I froze, my watering can still in my hand, droplets falling onto the earth like tiny tears. "Ethan," I said softly, unsure whether to be happy or cautious. "What brings you here?" They exchanged a glance. Caroline stepped forward, her tone sweet but tight. "We just wanted to visit you. It's been too long." "Too long?" I smiled faintly. 9 years too long, Caroline. I thought you had forgotten I existed." Her smile faltered for half a second before returning, brittle and artificial. "We were busy. You know how life gets." Of course I knew. Life gets busy when love runs out. I invited them in out of habit, the old reflexes of a mother who still hopes for love even after it's long gone. They looked around the living room, the ivory couches, the polished floors, the delicate vases, everything meticulously chosen. Caroline's gaze lingered on the large painting above the fireplace, an original artwork I had bought at a local gallery. "Wow, this place is something," she said, her eyes scanning every corner like a real estate agent. Ethan nodded, whistling low. "You really did well for yourself, Mom. I didn't know you had this kind of money." "I saved," I replied quietly. "Every penny I earned from decades of tutoring and selling hand-knitted clothes at the market. It wasn't sudden wealth, Ethan. It was slow patience." He smiled awkwardly, but his eyes were restless. Caroline walked toward the window, pretending to admire the sea view. "It must feel so peaceful here," she said. "Just you and the ocean. But don't you ever get lonely?" I looked at her, really looked. The woman who once sneered at my simplicity was now dressed in a designer outfit that couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. "No," I said. "Not anymore." The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan cleared his throat. "Mom, actually we came because we need your help. Things have been difficult." There it was. The truth, hidden behind polite smiles and false warmth. My stomach tightened, but my voice remained calm. "Difficult how?" Caroline sighed dramatically. "Ethan's business didn't do well. We had to sell our house. We're staying in a small rented place right now. It's temporary, of course, but we were wondering if we could stay here. Just for a little while." My heart sank, not from refusal, but from recognition. They weren't here for love. They were here for shelter. "For how long?" I asked, my tone neutral. "Maybe a few months." Ethan said quickly. Just until we get back on our feet. You have plenty of space here. We'd help with chores and... Plenty of space. I interrupted gently. Yes, I suppose. But Ethan, for 9 years you never once visited me. You never called. You never asked how I was. Why now? He looked away, ashamed. Caroline didn't. Because family helps each other, she said firmly. And you're our family, aren't you? Her words pierced me. Not because of what she said, but because of what she meant. You owe us. I smiled faintly and stood up. I see, I said. Let me think about it. They relaxed visibly, believing I was going to say yes. I walked to the window, my reflection merging with the ocean. The woman staring back at me wasn't the timid mother they once controlled. She was older, yes, but she had finally learned to say no. That night I couldn't sleep. The ocean roared softly outside my window, but my thoughts were louder. The echoes of Ethan's words, "We just need a little help," kept circling in my mind like a restless bird. I had heard those same words so many times before. Every time I gave in. Every time I lost a little more of myself. I had always told myself that it was what mothers did. They sacrificed, they forgave, they endured. But as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, I realized something painful and liberating. Endurance had become my prison. Morning came heavy and gray. I made breakfast, 3 plates out of habit, and watched the steam rise from the teacups. Ethan and Caroline joined me a little later, still in their travel clothes. They looked tired, but not from the journey. They looked tired from the burden of their own choices. Caroline's eyes scanned the dining table as though she was inspecting its worth. She noticed the silver cutlery, the hand-painted teapot, and I saw a flicker of greed beneath her polite expression. "Mom," Ethan began, taking a seat. "Caroline and I were thinking, maybe we can help you around the house. You shouldn't be doing everything alone at your age." The irony made me smile. "I've been managing for 9 years," I replied softly. "But thank you." He hesitated, glancing at Caroline. She leaned forward, her voice sugar-coated. "You must get lonely, Margaret. I know you say you're fine, but everyone needs company. We could stay a few months, maybe longer, until we settle down." I looked at her, silent for a long moment. The way she said Margaret, not Mom, not Mother, told me everything. To her, I wasn't family. I was an opportunity. "I'll think about it," I said again. Caroline smiled, relieved, and turned her attention to her phone. Ethan exhaled deeply. They both assumed I would agree, the same way I always had. But something inside me had shifted. After breakfast, I excused myself and went to my garden. The jasmine flowers swayed gently in the wind, their fragrance wrapping around me like a quiet prayer. I knelt down to pull out a few weeds and thought about the years I had spent waiting for love from people who didn't know how to give it. I thought about the nights I had gone to bed hungry so my children could eat, the dreams I buried so theirs could live, and the silence I swallowed every time they made me feel small. A seagull landed near my feet, cocking its head as if to ask why I looked so tired. I smiled sadly. "Because I gave too much," I whispered. By noon, Ethan had already started talking about rearranging the furniture. "This couch would look better near the window," he said casually. "We could maybe put the TV here, make it more like a family space." Caroline nodded in agreement, already acting like she belonged. "And maybe we can clear out one of the guest rooms. We'll need a bit of space for our things." I listened quietly, sipping my tea. They weren't asking anymore. They were planning. Finally, I said, "I see you've already decided you're staying." Ethan looked startled. "Mom, we just thought." "I haven't given you my answer yet." The air froze. Caroline's smile vanished. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "We just assumed you wouldn't mind. I mean, you're alone here. It's not like we're strangers. Strangers visit," I said, my tone calm but sharp. "They don't move in uninvited." Caroline's lips tightened. "We're trying to help you." "No," I said softly. "You're trying to help yourselves." Her face flushed with offense, but she didn't deny it. Ethan looked away, shame creeping into his eyes. The next few days were tense. They lingered around, pretending to be helpful, offering to fix things that didn't need fixing. They cleaned surfaces that were already spotless and complimented me too often, as if flattery could disguise their intentions. I didn't confront them directly, not yet. I wanted to see how far they would go. On the fourth day, while Caroline was out making phone calls, I overheard Ethan talking on the porch. His voice was low, but the words carried through the open window. Yes, she's got the place. It's beautiful. Big enough for us. I think if we play it right, she'll let us stay. Maybe even sign it over someday. She's old. After all, she won't need it forever. My blood ran cold. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from the sheer, burning clarity of betrayal. So that was it. Not love. Not care. Just property. Just greed. I didn't let him know I heard. I waited until evening when the three of us sat down for dinner. I served their favorite dishes, the ones I used to make when they were children, and smiled through the storm inside me. How's the food? I asked gently. Ethan smiled, unaware. It's amazing, Mom. Just like old times. Old times, I repeated quietly. Yes. Do you remember how, when you were little, I used to save the best piece for you? Even when there wasn't enough for me. He looked at me, confused. Of course. You were always generous. Caroline added, You still are. I met her gaze. Not anymore. They both froze. The words hung heavy in the air, final and cold. I stood up slowly, gathering the plates. You know, I used to think motherhood meant giving until there was nothing left. But I learned that love without respect is just servitude. Caroline blinked, caught off guard. What are you talking about? I turned to her. I'm talking about how you both came here not to see me, but to see what I could give you. You didn't come because you missed me, you came because you needed shelter. Because you thought I was weak. Ethan's face fell. Mom, it's not like that. It's exactly like that, I said quietly. I heard your conversation, Ethan. Every word. The silence that followed was suffocating. Caroline looked at him in horror. He tried to speak, but his voice broke under the weight of guilt. I think it's time you both find another place to stay, I said softly, my hands steady for the first time in years. They stared at me in disbelief. Caroline's face hardened. You're choosing solitude over family? I smiled sadly. No, I'm choosing peace over manipulation. Then I turned away, leaving them speechless at the table, two adults who had finally met the woman they never thought their mother could become. Ethan and Caroline didn't leave right away. They lingered for 2 more days, their presence heavy and unwanted, like storm clouds that refused to move. The silence in the house was thick with tension. Every sound, every glance carried unspoken hostility. Caroline barely looked at me. When she did, her eyes were cold and calculating. Ethan, on the other hand, had softened, guilt flickering across his face, but it wasn't the kind of guilt that came from love. It was the fear of losing something valuable. On the 3rd morning, I found Caroline in my study, rifling through drawers. She froze when she saw me standing at the door, her hand halfway into a folder that contained the deed to my house. I was just looking for a pen, she stammered, her voice too quick, her smile too nervous. I said nothing. I walked over, took the folder from her hand, and placed it back in the drawer. You'll find pens in the kitchen, I said quietly. And nowhere else. For a moment, our eyes met, and in that glance, all pretenses shattered. She knew that I knew, and I knew that she would stop pretending. That afternoon, she packed her bag. Ethan followed her around helplessly, torn between his wife's greed and his mother's quiet strength. We can't just leave, he whispered to her in the hallway, thinking I couldn't hear. We don't have anywhere else to go. Caroline's reply was sharp. Then convince her, Ethan. You're her son. Make her feel guilty. That's what mothers are for. The cruelty in her tone cut deeper than any blade. But I didn't cry. Not this time. My tears had dried up long ago, turned into something harder, colder, stronger. That evening, Ethan came to me on the porch, where I sat watching the horizon bleed orange and gold into the sea. The smell of salt and freedom filled the air. He stood beside me, silently for a long time before he spoke. Mom, she didn't mean what she said, he murmured. We're just going through a rough patch. Things have been hard since I lost my job. I nodded, still looking at the waves. I understand, but hardship doesn't excuse cruelty. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. You don't understand what it's like. Everything fell apart so fast. The debts, the house, the bills. Caroline, she's scared. We both are. You have so much, and we thought maybe that I would save you again, I finished for him. He looked down. You always used to. Yes, I said softly. And where did that get me, Ethan? 9 years of silence. 9 years without a single phone call, without a single birthday wish. You erased me because she didn't like me. You chose her comfort over my existence. He opened his mouth to speak, but I stopped him with a raised hand. No, you don't get to rewrite history now that it's convenient. When your father died, I was left with nothing, not even a word from you. I sold his watch, Ethan, the one he wanted you to have someday. I sold it to pay the bills you ignored, and I did it with pride because I thought at least you were happy. His face crumpled with shame. Mom, I didn't know. You didn't want to know, I said. You didn't ask. The sound of waves filled the silence that followed. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The wind picked up, lifting strands of my hair, and I felt strangely light, as if the truth itself had washed away the last of my burdens. I'm sorry, he whispered finally, his voice trembling. I made mistakes. Mistakes can be forgiven, I said gently, but only when they're not repeated. He looked at me then, truly looked, not at my house, not at what he could take, but at me, the woman who had loved him even when he'd forgotten her name. What do you want me to do? He asked. Leave, I said simply. Go build something for yourself. If you really mean your apology, prove it by standing on your own. Don't come to me because you need something. Come to me because you care. His eyes filled with tears, but I could see that he understood. Caroline wouldn't, but maybe he would. He nodded slowly, his voice breaking. You're stronger than I remembered, Mom. I smiled faintly. No, Ethan. I was always as strong. You just never noticed. That night, they packed their things. Caroline didn't say goodbye. She stormed out of the house with her chin held high, her pride louder than her shame. Ethan lingered by the door, his hand resting on the frame, as if reluctant to let go. Can I call you? He asked. I nodded. You can try, but not for money, Ethan. Only if you want to talk. He smiled weakly, eyes glistening. I will. And then he was gone. The sound of the car engine faded down the road, leaving behind a silence that felt both foreign and sacred. For the first time in years, my home belonged to me again, not just the walls and furniture, but the energy inside it. It breathed freely just as I did. That night, I sat by the window and looked out at the moonlight rippling across the sea. The loneliness that had once felt like a curse now felt like a choice. I had been afraid of being alone, but I finally realized that solitude was not emptiness, it was peace reclaimed from those who tried to drain it. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat with my thoughts. Faces from the past drifted through my mind. My husband's laugh, my son's first steps, the way he used to run into my arms after school. The child I loved still existed inside that man somewhere. Maybe one day, he'd find his way back. But I couldn't live waiting for that day anymore. My life was mine to live now, not to lend to others. I looked around at my home, the home I had earned through sweat, loss, and resilience, and whispered to the empty room, You did it, Margaret. You finally let go. The wind carried my words toward the open sea, and I felt them dissolve into something infinite. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to return. I wasn't hoping for anyone's approval. I simply existed, whole, free, and unafraid. In the distance, a storm began to brew, dark clouds gathering above the horizon, thunder grumbling faintly. But inside I felt calm. Because now I knew, storms come and go, but the ocean remains. And I, like the sea, had learned how to keep moving, even after being broken by waves. 3 months passed before I heard from Ethan again. By then, autumn had settled over the coast, painting the sky in muted gold and crimson hues. The ocean had changed, too. It no longer roared with summer's pride, but hummed softly with the calm of resignation. My days had fallen into a comforting rhythm. Mornings spent tending to my garden, afternoons writing in my journal, and evenings watching the horizon swallow the sun. I had begun to rediscover pieces of myself I didn't even know were missing. Then one afternoon, as the sea breeze carried the scent of rain through the open window, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My heart hesitated for a beat. When I stepped outside, I saw him, Ethan, standing by the gate, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his eyes tired but clearer than before. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. His voice trembled, as though the word itself was heavy with forgotten meaning. For a long moment, I said nothing. I simply looked at him, the same man who had once walked away, now standing in front of me, looking smaller than I remembered. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and there was a quiet humility in the way he held himself. Gone was the arrogance, the restless entitlement. What stood before me was not the son who had left. It was the boy I had once held in my arms after a nightmare, seeking safety in my warmth. "Come in," I said finally. Inside, he moved cautiously, as if afraid to disturb the peace of the house. I made tea, and we sat across from each other at the oak table that overlooked the ocean. The silence between us was no longer sharp. It was fragile, tentative, like a bridge built over still water. "I left Caroline," he said at last. I blinked, surprised, though not entirely. "I figured as much," I replied softly. "You wouldn't be here otherwise." He gave a hollow laugh. "You're right. She couldn't handle not getting what she wanted. When she realized there was no money, no inheritance, no rescue, she said she didn't see the point in staying." I stirred my tea slowly, watching the ripples fade. "And what about you, Ethan? What do you see the point in?" He looked down, ashamed. "I don't know yet, but I know I don't want to be like her anymore. I don't want to use people." He paused, his voice cracking. "You were right, Mom. I didn't ask. I didn't care. And now I've lost everything that was fake, and maybe that's the best thing that could have happened to me." His words sank deep into the quiet room. For years, I had dreamed of hearing something like that, an acknowledgement, not just an apology. But now that it was here, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt sad, like watching a broken clock finally tick again after years of silence. "Do you remember the day you stopped calling?" I asked gently. "It was your father's birthday. I waited by the phone all day, hoping you'd remember. I had baked his favorite pie. I thought maybe we could share it over the phone. But you never called." He nodded slowly, tears pooling in his eyes. "I remember," he whispered. "Caroline said it would be too awkward. She said it would only make things worse. And I listened to her. The sound of the waves filled the space between us. I felt a familiar ache stir in my chest, but it wasn't the sharp pain of betrayal anymore. It was something softer, more forgiving. "We all listen to the wrong people sometimes," I said. "But at some point, we have to stop blaming them. We have to own our silence, our choices." Ethan wiped his eyes and nodded. "That's why I'm here. I want to make things right. I don't expect forgiveness right away. I don't want to lose you again." I looked at him for a long time, searching his face for sincerity. I found it, not in his words, but in his eyes. The arrogance that once lived there had vanished, replaced by something raw and real. "Forgiveness," I said quietly, "isn't about erasing what happened. It's about deciding you don't want to carry the weight anymore." He met my gaze. "Then let me help you carry it, Mom, even if it takes the rest of my life." Something inside me broke then, not in pain but in release. For so many years, I had imagined this moment filled with anger or triumph, but instead, it came wrapped in gentleness. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. His fingers trembled as he gripped mine, like a child holding on to something fragile. We sat there in silence for a long time, two souls learning how to breathe the same air again. That evening, as the sun melted into the ocean, Ethan helped me water the garden. He asked about the plants, about the pies I used to sell, about the friends I made at the farmer's market. It was as if he was trying to rebuild every piece of connection that had been broken. When darkness fell, we stood by the porch, watching the stars flicker above the sea. "You were always happiest near the water," he said quietly. I smiled. "The sea teaches you things no person can. It teaches you to let go of what you can't control and to trust that the tide will always return, even if it leaves for a while." He nodded, staring out at the waves. "I want to learn that," he murmured. "You will," I said softly. "But you'll have to earn your peace, just like I did." He turned to me then, his face illuminated by the moonlight. "Can I stay for a while?" he asked. I hesitated. The old part of me, the mother who always said yes, wanted to agree instantly. But the woman I had become knew that love without boundaries was just another form of weakness. "You can stay for a week," I said firmly. "After that, You'll need to figure out where to go next." He smiled faintly, understanding. "That's fair." As he carried his bag to the guest room, I felt something shift within me. The past could not be undone, but maybe it could be rewritten in small, quiet moments, like a wound that heals not because it forgets the pain, but because it learns to live with the scar. That night, I stood by the window, watching the ocean shimmer under the moonlight. Ethan was here, not as the prodigal son seeking rescue, but as a man searching for redemption. For the first time, I didn't feel alone in my peace. And as the waves whispered against the shore, I realized something profound. Forgiveness wasn't something I gave to him, it was something I gave to myself. The following week passed like a quiet song carried by the sea breeze, soft, reflective, and filled with the kind of peace that only arrives after years of storm. Ethan kept his promise to help around the house. He mended the garden fence, painted the back porch, and spent hours trimming the overgrown hedges that I had long ignored. I watched him from the window sometimes, his movements steady but uncertain, like a man trying to rebuild both a fence and a relationship at the same time. In the evenings, we would sit together on the porch, sharing tea and conversation that came in gentle waves. He asked about my past, about the years I had spent selling pies at the market, about the people who had become my family when he wasn't around. I told him about Martha, the widow who had stood by me during my loneliest days. I spoke about the elderly couple who had helped me find my new home, and the quiet strength I discovered in solitude. Ethan listened without interrupting, a sign that he was truly beginning to understand the value of what he had lost. On the fifth night, as we watched the moon rise over the darkened ocean, Ethan spoke again, his voice low and hesitant. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking a lot about how I treated you. How we treated you. I can't stop wondering why it took losing everything for me to see it." I took a slow sip of my tea before replying. That's how life works sometimes. We only recognize the warmth of a fire after we've spent too long in the cold. He smiled faintly at my words but didn't respond. For a while, we just listened to the rhythmic crash of the waves. The ocean, eternal and patient, had become our silent witness. The next morning, I woke early to the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. Ethan had already set the table, 2 cups toast, and slices of the pie I had baked the night before. It was a small gesture, but it carried more meaning than any apology could. I sat down, and for the first time in many years, breakfast didn't feel lonely. After we ate, Ethan showed me his notebook. Inside were sketches, ideas for a small cafe by the beach where he wanted to sell my recipes. "You inspired this," he said quietly. "You built a life out of nothing, Mom. I want to try to do the same." I felt a swell of pride rise within me, mixed with something deeper. Hope. "It won't be easy," I said. "But if you've learned anything here, it's that the hardest paths often lead to the most beautiful views." He nodded, closing the notebook. "I know, but I want to earn this time. I don't want to hand it to me." That night, as I sat by the window, I thought about how far we had both come. The years of silence, the distance, the resentment, all of it had led us to this fragile peace. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was real. And sometimes, real was more precious than perfect. On the 7th day, Ethan packed his bag. The week had gone faster than I expected. I felt an ache in my chest watching him fold his clothes, the same kind of ache a mother feels when her child leaves home for the first time. But this time, the pain carried no bitterness. It was the kind of ache that came from love that had survived fire. He turned to me at the door, his expression soft but resolute. "I'm going to start fresh, Mom. I've already found a small room to rent in town. I'll get a job, save money, and open that cafe one day. And when I do, I want your pies to be the first thing on the menu." I smiled, feeling tears prick my eyes. "Then I'll make sure they're perfect." He hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, but instead he hugged me tightly. It wasn't a hurried embrace or one given out of guilt. It was genuine. For a moment, I felt the years melt away, and I was holding my little boy again, the one who used to run to me after falling off his bike, crying for comfort. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not turning me away." When he drove off, the house fell silent again. But it wasn't the lonely kind of silence I had once dreaded. It was peaceful, steady, alive with the hum of possibility. I stood on the porch, watching his car disappear down the road until it became a speck against the horizon. Then I turned toward the ocean, its waves gleaming under the morning sun, endless and reassuring. In the days that followed, I returned to my old rhythm. I baked, I read, I tended the garden. But something had changed inside me. My solitude no longer felt like isolation, it felt like a choice. A sacred space I had earned after a lifetime of giving. Every evening, I would light a candle by the window and watch the sea. Sometimes, I imagined Ethan somewhere in town, taking his first steps toward rebuilding his life. I didn't know if he would succeed, but I no longer needed to worry. I had given him what he needed most. Not money, not shelter, but the truth. And the truth had set both of us free. Weeks turned into months, and winter painted the world in shades of silver. One day, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. "Mom," it began, "I wanted to tell you I found a small shop space near the pier. It's nothing fancy, but it feels right. I've been using your old recipes. People love them. I even met someone who reminds me of you, kind, firm, and full of stories. I'm not the man I used to be, and it's because you finally made me see what really matters. Thank you for letting me come home, even for a little while. You gave me a second chance at life." I read the letter 3 times, tears slipping down my cheeks each time. I placed it beside a photo of him as a child, the one where he was holding a pie bigger than his head, smiling with crumbs on his cheeks. The years had taken so much, but they had also given me something precious: perspective. That night, I walked down to the beach. The tide was low, and the air smelled of salt and serenity. I took off my shoes and let the cold water kiss my feet. Above me, the moon hung like a promise kept. I thought about all the versions of myself I had been: the mother, the caretaker, the forgotten woman, the lonely soul, the reborn one. Each had played her part in leading me here, to this quiet peace by the sea. And as the waves curled toward the shore, whispering their eternal rhythm, I smiled. I had spent years waiting for love to come back. But I had learned something more powerful: love never truly leaves. It just changes shape, like the ocean. It withdraws, returns, and eventually teaches you how to stand on your own. That night, I stood tall under the starlit sky, the sound of the sea filling the silence of my heart. I was no longer the woman who waited by the phone, nor the mother who wept for forgiveness. I was simply myself, strong, free, and whole at last. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough.